Welcome back to the program. In case you're just joining us, you've missed almost the first half of the show where we keep you up to speed with everything happening in the world of business, development stories, and the markets. But this segment is also very key. This is where we discuss everything that concerns the economy and every other thing that follows it. Johnson Chukwu is joining me at the table. He's the Group Managing Director at Cowry Asset Management. Mr. Chukwu, welcome to Abuja. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I should be asking you guys Abuja.
We are doing well. I should be asking how Lagos is too, because the NSAS movement has been on. Even here in Abuja has been on. I know you were not on the streets, but...
How do you know?
I know you were not on the streets.
But I share the views and the concerns and the worries of those who are on the street, though I may not be physically there. I have been personally affected by the SARS overzealousness. My son was once stopped when my wife sent him to ShopRite to go and buy some groceries. And they frisked him, asked him to give them his phone. And this is another graduate, a first-class student of Unilag, just because he's carrying BS. They took his phone, asked him to open the phone. They checked through all his contacts, checked his emails, checked his text messages and WhatsApp messages, and asked him who has a car. He said, my father. He said, okay, what did you got? Who gave you the money to go and buy things in ShopRite? He said, my mother. And they kept him with them. He said, okay, let me call my mom. They refused. Until eventually, luckily for him, he made a photocopy of the check my wife gave him before making withdrawal. He said, this is the check my mother gave me. These are the items I bought. This is the list I gave her. This is her number. You can call her. It was only after a long time they released him. And for no just cause. So I can relate with people who are on the street and say, look, these guys have become unmanageable. They've gone beyond the call of duty. They are harassing us instead of protecting us. That's a fact of the matter. Because I was ready to go to any extent to address that issue on a personal basis, and I'm happy the whole Nigerians have come out to say, look, we can't continue to live with the law enforcement agents that are not enforcing law but are harassing citizens.
I think this is more than harassment, really, because where do you draw the line? Because I've gotten a lot of complaints about the NSAS, and it's unfortunate that yesterday I started this conversation, my interview with it. Today again I'm starting because it is something that is entrenched right now. We cannot run from it. The government cannot run from it. Where do you draw the line between harassment? Where do you draw the line between even the SARS themselves and the armed robbers themselves? Because at the end of the day, how much do you, I'm going on the street, you ask me for my phone. Is it not invasion of my privacy?
Absolutely.
Don't I have constitutional right? I really do not understand, except we are not calling a spade in this country, and we are all deceiving ourselves because this is our country. But how do you think that the issue of the police should be addressed? Because like I said on the show yesterday, for me it's even beyond NSAS. It's beyond it because these are elements already, that are already in the police force. The IGP has done what he would do according to the president's directive. Reassign them to do what? They already have a culture. They already have what they are used to.
Well, I think one of the reasons why they are behaving the way they did, they had a sense of immunity. They felt, which was the case, that the actions and overzealousness or abuse of people's rights were not going to be brought to account. And that sense of invisibility has been dismantled by the IGP disbanding SARS. So I think that will, even if they are reassigned to other functions, and I believe the IGP should, one, reorientate them, retrain them, and assign them to desk-bound jobs, so that they will no longer have the opportunity to interface with the citizens, and at least in the meantime until they purge their mind of such attitude. I think it might be difficult to say dismiss all of them, but for those who we have found to be culpable in the abuse of rights or in the extrajudicial killing of citizens, they should be brought to book. But clearly, I'm happy The president has spoken on that. The vice president has spoken on that. The IGP has taken action. Some of the demands of NSAS groups should also be looked into. The Nigerian police requires holistic reform or transformation.
I was coming to that. Because if you take a look at, for example, the 2021 budget has allocated 441 billion naira to the police, Ministry of Police Affairs. I've always advocated, even on this show, in as much as they say you beat your child with the left hand, you also tell the child to come with the right hand. So I try as much as possible to be objective on this. The police at this time, the NSAS or the SAS officers are not giving the police a good name. The police did not even have a good name before. Come on, guys. Yes, we need to say the truth. SAS is not helping matters. But I also understand where the police also stands. They do not have fund. If you take a look at where they are living, people shouldn't live there. The government should also attend to their needs. How much is an average police officer earning? These are things that we really need to say to ourselves if we really want to holistically reform the system.
Yeah, that's why I said that we need to do a holistic reform, transformation of the police, starting from the qualifications for recruitment in the Nigerian police, the standard of recruits or the quality or attributes of recruits, to the training curriculum, the training standards, and then you move on to the issue of welfare, what we call the hygiene factors, their living environment, their conditions of service, which include their salaries and wages, the motivations, the insurance against life and loss of limbs or injuries during service, and the progression, career progression. You need to look at the entire government of how the police professional career is, how people go through their professional career in the police force. People who are competent, who have served their country, also deserve to retire with some level of comfort. That does not seem to apply to members of the police. So I think we need to reform those things. Because the truth is that if you do not address the hygiene factors, their remunerations, the benefits, their conditions of service, their living environment, the quarters, you are likely going to see people who will remain corrupt, not because they were born to be corrupt, but because the incentive system is such that they need to take care of themselves because the system is not taking care of them. We need to look at all those things. But I'm happy this agitation is bringing a lot of things to the fore. It's once an opportunity it has presented an opportunity for us as a people to discuss the entire policing system in the country, which we should take to the extent of addressing the issue of local police or state police or local police. In my village, Chukwu, we now have a vigilante group which we have registered with the police, and that has brought a lot of these petty crimes to almost zero level, because the people involved are people who know them. You really can't hide with local policing. They know your tendencies, they know your criminal, your family background, and what has happened is that what we have put in place is that when little crimes are committed, they are immediately arrested. They don't have the power to prosecute. If it's beyond them, if they can't resolve it, they now take it to the police. And unfortunately, when you take some of these things to the police, you now encounter bigger problems. And I'll tell you some of those problems. I've had instances where the police called me and said, "You're a leader in the community. Your people brought people to us who have committed crime. We cannot continue to keep them. You have to find a way to support us to keep them. Otherwise, we're going to release them." The simple reason that they do not even have enough vote to feed detainees. And then you have to escalate to the issue of the legal system, the process of prosecution. They don't have vehicles to convey accused to court. They have to hire public transport to convey accused to court. They don't even have enough petty cash votes to maintain the stations, talk less of maintaining good living standard around the station. So there are a lot of things we need to address, and I hope that the president will replicate what he has done in the ministry, in the educational sector, where he is now coming up with a special salary scheme for teachers. And I always tell people, look, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. If you create the right work environment and the right incentive system, you're going to attract the best in your country into that profession.
You know, when we say these things, at least I, for one, will say these things because if you even meet the police themselves will not come out to say this, I can tell you. They won't come out to say that these are our problems. But we know because we are all the same people and we need to say it for you. Just like you said, ask a DPO how much that DPO has to run the station. Perhaps little or nothing. So you can imagine if that DPO sees where to get money from. That DPO has children in school. That DPO also wants the good things of life, like our honorables too do. So we need to speak the truth and we need to fix this country. So the police has got to be fixed. They cannot continue to survive on this kind of salary, except we are deceiving ourselves. We need to say it for you because the police will not come out to say it. That's why I'm saying it for you. Meanwhile, the protests also need to be peaceful. We need to say that. The young people on the street, the protest should be peaceful, but the police people also should not take it against, should not begin to harm the protesters, isn't it?
Yeah, my take is actually the protesters should begin to wind down their protest. They've made a big success of the protests. We shouldn't allow it to degenerate so that we lose the essence of the victory that they have achieved. They have also gained a lot more. They have gained the capacity to mobilize without using any of the traditional communication channels. They have now activated the power of social media communication. That will also mean that Nigerians will be agitating for other reforms in the future. And they've also shown that they can fight for a common cause across the entire length and breadth of the country, irrespective of the tribe, race, religion. We saw the NSAS demonstration virtually all part of the country. So the Nigerian youths have gained a lot of mileage from this. And the thing for them is to try to end this successfully and peacefully so that they will sustain and retain the goodwill to confront the government on other areas that we need to agitate for reforms.
If you take a look at President Buhari's budget 2021, a budget of economic recovery and resilience, is that what will take us out of an imminent recession? Because even President Buhari himself said, brace up for another recession. And I sympathize with this government because this is a government of history. President Buhari, 2016, first recession in 25 years. We're just trying to get out of it. Everybody's trying to get out of it with a snail speed. The pandemic hit and worsened everything. Second recession again in 4 years. Brace up for another recession. How tightening would your belt be this period?
What I would say is that good 18, that nobody is fooling him or herself or fooling the country. The president has come out clean in his budget speech and had made it clear to us that we are not likely going to escape a recession. He did point out in his speech that the economy contracted at 6.1% in the second quarter. It's likely going to contract in the third quarter, and we will end this year in the negative. But he is hoping that the budget of 13.08 trillion naira will reflate the economy to the extent that the economy will grow by 3% in 2021. I think that might be a lot optimistic. We might have a marginal positive growth in 2021, depending on how well the efforts to stimulate the economy goes. I am happy that we have an expansionary budgetary provision in this next year, just like we have expansionary budgetary provision this year. But a lot of things are being done, and I must, I hardly come to your program and speak so flowering about the government. But I must admit that some of the things we have come to argue here, some of the issues we have pushed for here are being implemented. So we must commend them for that. Otherwise, we'll become like social critics that keep criticizing whether it's sunny or
when the government does well.
Yes, and one of them is the president made it categorical in his speech that the government is not going to pull back on the deregulation of the downstream sector, of the oil and gas sector. That may not give you the reward or benefit you expect the next day, but it sets the structural platform for us to begin to restructure some aspects of our economy. He also said the service reflective service-based tariff for the power sector is not going to be reversed. Those two statements are strong statements, which are the things we were expecting from somebody with, of his attributes, that is going to come and tell us, look, this is going to be a difficult thing, but we're going to do it. And I'm happy he's doing that. Let me tell you, Nancy, the benefit of the petroleum industry reform that is going on now. The refineries today, once you have a cost-reflective or market-determined pricing for petroleum products, you will see in the next couple of months, maybe in the next couple of a few years, refineries will be set up. Local refinery will be set up. We're going to spend so much, save so much from the amount we're spending on importation of petroleum products. And I can tell you that importation of petroleum products is the single largest foreign exchange outlet that we have in the country. So if you take out that, you will see the pressure you have on your foreign reserve will decrease.
Then the naira too.
And naira will stabilize. So this action is going to lead to a very strong positive impact on our foreign reserve, foreign exchange rate. And those are factors we have been begging for. It may not happen during his time as a president, but it will help us reposition the economy. Second issue, the issue of service reflective tariff. That will also lead to stronger investment in the downstream or in the power sector, particularly the distribution segment, which seems to be the weakest link. If you strengthen the distribution, power distribution, you are likely going to, it becomes easier for the government to also strengthen the transmission so that we can wheel out more power that is generated. And once you have everybody in the entire value chain is getting their due for services provided, then people will have the incentive to invest more in the generation as well as distribution, as well as even the gas infrastructure, gas treatment and drying, and gas supply channels or pipelines. So these are critical reforms that we have been begging for, and I'm happy the president is doing that. The president also has announced that the rationalization of the ministry, agency, and department should take place. And for me, that is particularly important. If you look at the trajectory or the non-debt and non-personnel recurrent expenditure of the government in the past 5 years, 2015 to 2019, you will observe in 2015, total non-debt, non-personnel recurrent expenditure was only 681 billion naira. By the time we got to 2019, it had grown to 1.89 trillion naira, almost a 300% increase. So that is just non-debt, just what we call other recurrent expenditure. Personnel costs had grown from 2.2 trillion, from 1.8 trillion to 2.2 trillion. Just about another 25% increase. Debt service had grown from 1 trillion in 2015 to 2.45 trillion in 2019. That is almost 150% increase, principally because we are building structures that are not creating improvement in productivity. And we are spending money on recurrent expenditure instead of spending money on capital expenditure. Your capital expenditure, what have you done? We've seen an increase from 881 to just 1.16 trillion. That's what we spent last year on recurrent expenditure, on capital expenditure. So you've not seen material movement in capital expenditure. That is factoring, when you factor in the fact that the currency has devalued over that time, you realize that even what we spent last year was far less than what we spent in 2015. So we need to rationalize the ministry, agency, and department and collapse overlapping agencies so as to cut down government recurrent expenditure and free up resources for investment in critical infrastructure. If we don't do those things, you are not going to see any reform or change in the government fiscal condition.
The question also would be, because we're seeing an increase in recurrent expenditure, while we need increase in capital expenditure, especially as the country is facing an imminent recession and also facing a health crisis. You know, yes, facing a health crisis, the pandemic has also worsened a lot of things. So doesn't it also make sense that there should be a lot more capital spending to also get us out of the recession perhaps quickly?
Well,
I understand the economic sustainability plan, you know, it's there. But the capex also, doesn't it have a role to play in terms of getting us out quickly?
You see, the capex is the most critical government component of government expenditure, particularly for an emerging economy like ours. But unfortunately, the obtuse nature of our fiscal, of federal government fiscal condition is such that it gives little room for investment in capital expenditure. And let's look at 2021 budget proposals. The government is budgeting 13.08 trillion. Of that amount, about 3.8 trillion is for capital expenditure. You have a recurrent expenditure of one is, let me break the recurrent expenditure into their basic components. You have non-debt recurrent expenditure of 5.6 trillion naira, which is personnel cost about 3.76 trillion, and other recurrent expenditure. Then you had debt service of 3.12 trillion. If you add 3.12 trillion to 5.6 trillion, you're already on 8.7 trillion. That is your recurrent expenditure projection for 2021. Your federal government revenue 2021 is 7.88 trillion. So in effect, the federal government revenue is short of the recurrent expenditure.
So you borrow.
So you have to borrow. The government is planning to borrow about 4.8 trillion next year. So it simply means that for government to spend 1 kobo on capital budget, it must have borrowed from the debt market or from any other source. So you can see that why I had to emphasize on the need for us to cut down on the cost of the government bureaucracy. If you don't do that, it simply means any kobo we spent is borrowed.
And it's been like that.
And it's been like that.
Yeah, because for every 1 naira we spend close to
So
something.
there's no country that will develop that way. And that's why we're amassing up debt. We're not talking about 30 trillion naira in debt. We are talking about 3.12 trillion for debt service. And we're trying to borrow another 4.8 trillion or thereabout. So by the time you look at all those things, you're going to see further increase in debt service. And as it stands today, Nnaji, let me tell you one thing. Last year, which is when we had a full year report, total federal government revenue was 4.12 trillion naira. Debt service was 2.45 trillion. Debt service alone was more than 65% of federal government revenue. Debt service alone. So where do you have the headroom for investment in capital expenditure? Which is why if we don't restructure the financial or the fiscal framework of the government, we're going to continue to run behind schedule. The president said that it will take us, that Second Niger Bridge is about 46% completion stage. That project was started more than 5 years ago. We're 46%. So if you do another 5 years, you'll be on 92%.
With the rate of 46%.
With the rate, and remember that currency is devaluing. Some of those expenditure you need to mob and demob when you do not sustain, when you don't meet your payment plans. There are sometimes penalties. So at the end of the day, you may end up spending another 10 years doing the Second Niger Bridge. But Nnaji, we could have done that bridge in 2 years if we had allowed the private sector to build it.
But you know,
and the debt burden will be on the government. It simply means every kobo the government has spent on that Second Niger Bridge was borrowed.
We are not talking of infrastructure now, whether I'll need to do a show on it at a later date, because you have commercial infrastructure, you have social infrastructure. You also need to also know that a Nigerian infrastructure has been created, about 15 trillion, people like you, private sector. You have ideas on how perhaps to develop the infrastructure of Nigeria beyond this. But that is a discussion for another day. The budget 2021 that the president has presented before the National Assembly, how are the markets taking it? Equities markets, the bond market, the Naira, for example. Will the Naira derive some kind of strength from it moving forward in terms of investors are looking, okay, this country, they've presented their budget earlier, at least the president did well for that. bringing the budget in October, unlike what we used to have. So would there be a sense of direction somehow for the Naira and for other markets?
Well, what I would say that what we've seen in the market is that the market has been responding or reacting to other more market-sensitive information coming from the federal government, coming from global rating agencies, coming from the central bank. And I'll highlight some of those things. The fact that the government is now determined to take out petroleum product subsidy, the market took it positively. The survey reflective tariff that the president is insisting that the government will not go back on, the market is also good news to the market. And these factors may have contributed to the decision of Fitch rating agency to review our risk rating, sovereign risk rating outlook from negative to stable. And that improvement in outlook would have also drawn the some positive feel from foreign portfolio investors. From the monetary side, we've seen yield on fixed income instruments, particularly treasury bills, average about 1.4%. We've seen even 364-day bills trading at below 2%. And what that means is that investors are now shifting or moving their investment from fixed income instruments to equity instruments, which is what we saw a 2-week rally that ended on Wednesday last week. And those 2 weeks rally led to a market appreciation of as high as 12%.
So it reversed the year-to-date loss, which we used to see earlier.
Yeah, it reversed the year-to-date loss.
Leveled it out.
Yes. In fact, by Tuesday last week, we had a market gain of about 7%. Of course, that has moderated a bit because we've seen profit taken. But the key thing is that investors are now considering the equities market as preferred investment outlet to fixed income instruments. If you also recognize the fact that for companies that have announced their half-year results, many of them declared dividends. The dividend yield in some of those stocks is as high as 7%, much higher than what you have from the fixed income space. So that also drove investment to the equities market. That's why I said, look, the equity market has responded more to other market-sensitive information like outlook on the economy, yield on fixed income instruments, and the decision of the government to further liberalize the economy and allow private sector to be in the commanding height of economic development.
But how, let me put it this way, how long will this return or how long will this attraction be for the equities market? Because from what you've just said right now, the yield of some stocks like 7%, you said, if you still take a look at that, it's still lower than what inflation rates in the country is. So apparently, is there really an investment in Nigeria that is worth investing in?
You know,
because if you look at our inflation, 13.22%,
yeah.
Is there an investment that is giving us more return than that? They shouldn't come to me with Ponzi schemes, guys, or tell me go and invest in this.
And the Ponzi schemes are selling.
So don't invest in Ponzi schemes. Or even some of the agri-tech fund platforms. You know, they will say crowdfunding for agri and all of that. A lot of them promise more than that. But some of them now we see are passing through difficult times. So realistically, what investment in Nigeria will give you more than the inflation rates
as at now, there is no short-term investment, and I have to use the word short-term investment, that is giving yield or return above inflation rates. But long-term investors, those who are investing in private equity instruments, those who are investing in the real sector of the economy that are injecting equity capital into companies will likely get returns above the inflation rate. I mean, average return in the economy is still in the region of, for long-term investors, it's still in the region of 25–30% over time. But your question is, how long will this yield environment last? We have to recognize the fact that because our currency is not floating, because we do not have a market-driven exchange rate. There's no liquidity in the FX market. So you don't have the options of converting your local currency investment into foreign currencies and investing elsewhere, where you could possibly get yields that are better than the inflation rate. Okay. A second factor is that globally, some advanced economies are actually giving negative yield on their fixed income instruments. Because of the need to stimulate their economies, a lot of central banks have gone into expansionary monetary policies, and they are driving down interest rates to stimulate the economies. So it's not as if globally there are environments where you go and see very good yields, much higher than what we have today. Added to the fact that Nigerian investors are constrained because they do not have the latitude to invest in markets outside the Nigerian market. So we are stuck with whatever yield environment. So what we're dealing is the best of the bad situations.
I like that. Make the best of the bad situation. Yes, make the best of the worst situation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chukwu. We'll leave it at that. Let's continue.
My pleasure.
To watch the situation. All right, that's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. I've been speaking with Johnson Chukwu, who is the Group Managing Director at Cowry Asset Management. We've been looking at the 2021 budget and every other thing that comes with it. There are so many other things that come with it, but in days to come, we'll continue to break it down for you. I am Nnaji. Don't forget to be the best version of yourselves and protect yourselves. There's still COVID out there. I'll see you all tomorrow. God willing, bye now. Thank you for watching our video. Please hit the subscribe button below, turn on post notification to follow all our updates.